Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the families of the victims of these senseless crimes. The loss of their loved ones in such a tragic manner is heartbreaking, and their memories will forever be honored and cherished. We've all heard about killers, but do you know that there are different types of killers? Some snap and kill people over the most trivial matters. Their minds are dark mazes of insanity, compelling them to commit unspeakable acts without any remorse. What drives these monsters? What pushes someone to the extent of committing such an act out of rage, or even a simple moment of misunderstanding? How could they kill someone so mercilessly? This is a worldwide phenomenon. Boundaries of states or countries do not confine these notorious killers. Their terrifying acts still give chills to people around the globe. Today, we bring you 3 cases from 3 different parts of the world. One from Philadelphia in the US who dismembered every single part of their boss's body and cooked him. A mother from the Caribbean island in the UK who killed her 2 children out of rage. And a bodyguard from Quarry Bay Park in Hong Kong, whom one might call a bodyguard, as she was supposed to protect people, but instead killed her relatives out of rage. So does a person's upbringing or the place where they are born or raised affect them to such an extent that they commit a merciless act? Let's find out in today's video as we dive deep into these 3 cases and explore what forces led these notorious killers to blur the line between human and devil. In the first case, a humble 70-year-old man was killed by a man he believed was his student and, moreover, a friend. Peter Gerald was a well-known licensed massage therapist. He was well known for his gentle demeanor and dedication to his work. He lived a quiet and peaceful life in northeast Philadelphia, with his beloved exotic pets, including birds and reptiles. However, his peaceful existence would take a dark turn when Teray entered his life. Peter's home was a sanctuary of animals, including birds and reptiles, which he cared for meticulously. To assist him, Peter would occasionally hire caretakers. This is how he met Teray Herring, a man with a checkered past but seemingly a genuine interest in animals. 47-year-old Teray was introduced to Peter through mutual acquaintances. Initially, Teray appeared eager and responsible, ready to help with the demanding tasks of caring for exotic pets. He would help Peter take care of his many pets, including parrots, tortoises, bearded dragons, lizards, dogs, and koi. Peter, who was trusting and kind-hearted, welcomed Teray into his home believing he had found a reliable assistant. But what was unbeknownst to Peter was that Teray had a criminal history and a volatile nature. Over time, he began to take advantage of Peter's trust. What started as a professional relationship soon became a sinister plot fueled by greed and deception. Teray's criminal background included charges of burglary, theft, and assault. His association with Jeanette Pace, his ex-girlfriend with a troubled past, only added to the growing danger. Jeanette and Teray hatched a plan that would lead to a gruesome end for Peter Gerald. On February 11, 2021, the real nightmare unfolded. The peaceful neighborhood of northeast Philadelphia was jolted by an unimaginable crime. John Rowan, Peter's neighbor of 21 years, noticed that he hadn't seen Peter for a few days now. He tried to contact him more than once, and even knocked at his door. Rowan said that Teray answered the door and replied he didn't know where Peter was. John noticed a suspicious U-Haul truck parked near Peter's home. Later, Rowan noticed Teray struggling to carry an incredibly heavy big black bag to the U-Haul. With calculated calm, Teray loaded the last of the trash bags into the back of the truck. Rowan was disturbed and concerned only by the low hum of the truck's engine as he drove away from Peter's house. The sight prompted Rowan to call the police. Officer Brian Howell responded to the call and immediately drove off to the location. Just a few blocks from Peter's house, Officer Howell noticed the U-Haul truck driving suspiciously slow. Taking no more than a few seconds, Officer Hall pulled the truck over. The vehicle came to a halt on the 1000 block of Sanibel Street. Teray, attempting to maintain his composure, rolled down his window as the officer approached. Hall asked him about the truck. Teray, quick on his feet, made up a story and said the back of the vehicle had trash bags with the cow leg that he had just shot in the mountains. Despite all his stories, Hall decided to investigate the truck. Teray stepped out of the vehicle. Teray was visibly shaking and very nervous. The officer looked in the back of the truck and saw a large black bag that was leaking blood. The beam of the flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing the true horror within. Stuffed inside the trash bags were not animal remains, but a human torso. The sight was beyond anything Howell had expected.
Human remains inside a trash bag in the back of this U-Haul during a traffic stop. Crime scene investigators and animal protection officers were at this home on Sanibel Street Friday morning.
The investigation quickly pointed to Teray as the primary suspect, as he was the one seen with the body. He had been seen in the vicinity of Peter's home, so it was quite simple to point at him. As the authorities made the gruesome discovery of the human torso in the back of the U-Haul truck, Teray's demeanor shifted dramatically. He quickly abandoned his story about the cow leg and began spinning a new tale. "I was paid to get rid of the body," Teray blurted out, desperation seeping into his voice. The officers, skeptical yet intrigued, brought him in for further questioning. During the interrogation, Teray admitted to dismembering Peter Gerald's body, but insisted he had not committed the murder. He instead put all the blame on Rafik McNichols, his ex-girlfriend's current boyfriend. Teray told the authorities that it was Rafik who killed Peter. He painted a picture of a gruesome scene he claimed to have stumbled upon. Teray stated that he had gone to Peter's home on February 8th. As he entered, he found Peter lying on the floor, dead, with a severe head wound and blood pooling around him. Teray claimed that he was paralyzed with fear and confusion upon finding the body. According to his account, he stayed in the house with Peter's corpse for at least a day and a half, unsure what to do next. During this time, the reality of the situation began to settle, and his survival instincts kicked in. Facing the horrifying task before him, Teray decided to burglarize the home, taking anything of value he could find. Then, in a desperate bid to cover up the crime, he dismembered Peter's body, believing that disposing of the remains would conceal the murder. He described the methodical yet ghastly process of cutting up the body and placing the parts into trash bags. His plans, however, were far from flawless. He also mentioned that he had called his ex-girlfriend, Jeanette Pace, to help with the thing. Jeanette had brought her current boyfriend, Rafik McNichols, to assist with the stealing. Upon hearing about his ex-girlfriend's involvement in the heist, she was immediately detained for questioning. As the investigators started piecing the puzzle together, Jeanette's account took the story in a different direction. Her version was more believable and had a ring of truth. Jeanette explained that the entire scheme was orchestrated to rob Peter. According to her, Teray had meticulously planned every detail. He had called her saying that there were some exotic animals that he wanted to sell on the dark web. He convinced her to help with the promise of a substantial share of the loot. Jeanette was a drug abuser, and she needed to pay her bills and was down on luck, so she traveled from South Jersey to Philadelphia to help him. Teray had even provided her with a taser and instructed her to subdue Peter as soon as they confronted him. On the fateful day, Jeanette nervously clutched the taser as she and Teray approached Peter. She reluctantly pressed the taser against Peter, sending a jolt of electricity through his body. Peter's body stiffened before collapsing to the ground, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Teray wasted no time, launching himself at Peter, pinning him to the ground. Peter, disoriented and in pain, begged Teray to stop. His voice was a desperate plea, trying to reason with the man he once called a friend. "Why are you doing this to me, Teray? I tried to help you," Peter implored, his voice trembling. Teray's eyes were cold, devoid of any remorse. He then ordered Jeanette to try the credit cards at the nearest convenience store, which she did. And when she got back, Peter was already dead, with marks around his neck and his nose cut off. During the interrogation, Jeanette painted a vivid picture of the event, which highlighted Teray's ruthlessness and her growing regret. She also added that Teray had wanted her to sell all the exotic animals found in Peter's place, and after dealing with the body, they broke into Peter's safe and took about $3,000, half of which went to Teray, and the other half was split between Jeanette and her boyfriend. After Jeanette's confession, the authorities brought in Rafik McNichols, the boyfriend, the third person involved in the burglary. With Rafik's arrival, the story took a dark and horrifying turn, revealing a more sinister plot than anyone anticipated. Rafik sat in the interrogation room with a mix of fear and defiance. As he began speaking, the room seemed to grow colder. According to Rafik, Jeanette claimed that after she had tased Peter and he had fallen to the ground, she and Teray bound his hands and ankles with tape. The act of binding Peter was not just to immobilize him, but to ensure he couldn't escape. The next part of the story was even more disturbing. They had dragged Peter's helpless body into his garage, a place that now seemed like a chamber of horrors. Jeanette, with a cold and calculated demeanor, instructed Teray to cut off Peter's hands and feet. The cruelty of her command was shocking, but what followed was even more gruesome. She told Teray to deep fry Peter's body parts in hot oil. The brutal image of such an act sent shivers down the spines of the investigators. But the horror didn't end there. Jeanette had also ordered Teray to pull out Peter's teeth. By mutilating Peter's body parts, they aimed to erase any trace of the crime. Rafik's confession added a new layer of horror to the crime. The investigators tried to put all the pieces together. After interviewing all three suspects, the investigators once again found themselves in the victim's house. And this time, they found the other body parts inside Peter's unattached garage, as described by Rafik. This served as a piece of evidence that they tried to burn. Teray finally gave up and broke under pressure. He started making confessions to the investigators. Following this, the investigators went on to search the dumpsters as Teray had led them to, and lo and behold, behind the convenience store on Kelvin Street, they found the remaining body parts. They finally arrested Teray Herring and Jeanette Pace in February 2021. Authorities of the district attorney's office stated that the couple tased, beat, and choked Peter to death in his home before dismembering his body and frying his body parts to destroy DNA evidence. The couple was arrested and charged with multiple offenses. Teray later admitted that he cooked parts of the body in hot oil in attempts to remove the victim's DNA, and then disposed of the body in various dumpsters. The authorities charged the three defendants with taking various items from Peter's home, including cash, a television, and medication. Jeanette was also accused of stealing Peter's Ford Expedition SUV, which was recovered by the police. Following this, Philadelphia Municipal Court Judge Christine M. Hope held Teray for trial on counts of murder, burglary, theft, trespassing, conspiracy, abuse of a corpse, receiving stolen property, and tampering with evidence. Jeanette Pace pled guilty to third-degree murder, conspiracy, and possession of an instrument of crime that took place in July, according to the court records. Before the ruling, Joanne Pescatore, assistant supervisor of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Homicide Unit, told the judge that Rafik had participated in the burglary after Peter Gerald's death. So Rafik faced burglary charges in the case and was not charged in connection with Peter's death. When he waived his right to a preliminary hearing, Municipal Court Judge Joffe Pittman III ordered him held for trial and kept his bail at $500,000. Teray Herring was finally found guilty on Thursday, May 9, 2021, of murdering 70-year-old Peter Gerald, and after that, he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole with an additional 33 years for the other offenses. The murder of Peter Gerald by Teray Herring is a tragic tale of trust betrayed and kindness exploited. But imagine trusting someone with your everything, only to be betrayed by your own mother just because she loves you too much. When even family betrays you, trust becomes an illusion, like in the second case that we have in store for you. This is Veronique John. This mother of two is originally from the Caribbean island of St. Vincent. She was a 50-year-old mom of 11-year-old Ethan and 7-year-old Elizabeth. She was a devoted mother and a hard-working charity shop worker. Life was going quite normal, but not for too long. Her life took a dark turn that no one saw coming. Veronique, along with her children and her husband beside her, lived in a modest home on Flack Street in Stoke-on-Trent, where the tragic events unfolded. June 11, 2023 began like any other day in the quiet suburban neighborhood where the John family lived. Like any other day, Veronique was working on her daily chores. Her husband, Nathan John, had already left for work. To others, the Johns seemed like a perfect little family. Ethan was a bright and curious child, whereas Elizabeth was a ray of sunshine as described by the school community. She was a kind, caring, and friendly person who always had a smile on her face, both bright and popular among her peers. But beneath this cover of normalcy, dark clouds were gathering. Veronique had been struggling with various stressful theories for some time. The pressures of maintaining a perfect household, coupled with her suspicions about Nathan possibly having an affair, had been taking a toll on her. She felt like she was losing all her control over herself, and rage was boiling just under the surface. However, no one could have predicted the tragedy that would unfold that day. As the morning progressed, Veronique's behavior became increasingly erratic, and not long after, her agitation had reached a fever pitch, and she found herself holding a knife. Her mind was a full whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She was convinced that Nathan was planning to take her children away from her. In a sudden and violent outburst, Veronique stormed into the children's room. Ethan had barely any time to react before his mother attacked him with the knife. Veronique then turned to Elizabeth and inflicted similar wounds on her, ensuring that her children would never be taken from her. But her violent spree was not over. Driven by a twisted sense of justice and still gripped by her paranoid delusions, she decided to confront Nathan. Veronique drove off to the car wash, which was her husband's workplace. She pulled over, and before he could react, she lunged at him with the knife, stabbing him in the stomach. She left immediately and returned home after that. The reality of what she had done had just begun to sink in. She picked up the phone and without any second thoughts dialed the emergency line 999, her voice eerily calm. She reported, "I am calling to report I just killed my 2 kids." The authorities immediately arrived at the location. Upon her arrest, she said, "If you have a gun, shoot me. I'm not a monster. He was going to take them from me." After the arrest, the authorities investigated John's residence. Ethan was declared dead after being found in a bedroom, while Elizabeth was discovered in the living room, having suffered head trauma and 3 areas of sharp force injury, including to her stomach. The injured Nathan, on the other hand, had immediately made a call to 999.
Starship Police Emergency.
Yeah, I'm Nathan John from 33 Flack Street. My wife just came to my car wash and stabbed me.
He was immediately rescued and taken to the hospital. The authorities made their best efforts to save the children and called upon the paramedics, but were not able to save them as they had died at the scene. Their bodies were sent for examinations, and upon investigating, disturbing discoveries were made. Dr. Brett Lockyer, a forensic pathologist, revealed that Ethan suffered wounds to his hand, which suggested that the kid tried to defend himself. The little boy suffered 21 separate knife wounds, which included his head, chest, neck, and hands. Elizabeth also suffered a fatal wound to her neck and had bruises all over the left side of her face and forehead. The 7-year-old had a stab wound that went right through her stomach, and also had a brain injury that was supposedly caused by at least one forceful blow, as described by the pathologist. The case was heard at the Nottingham Crown Court. However, Veronique did not attend the trial because she was declared mentally unfit for it. She was interviewed under caution and given a community resolution notice. During the interview, she said, "It's something I was thinking about for a long time. Just killing myself and the kids. Unless you guys are offering me the death penalty, I have nothing else to say," she added. "I did it because I love my children, to protect my children. If there's any possible way I could be put to death, I would like that. I mean it, 100%. The judge, Mr. Justice Chowdhury, told the jurors that this trial wouldn't be the same as usual because the defendant is under a disability and would be unable to participate in the trial in any meaningful sense. During the hearing, Justice Chowdhury described the attacks as almost too horrific to comprehend. He stated that the reason behind the abominable savagery seemed to be an attempt to hurt her husband, fearing he would take their children away. He told the jurors that the only task for them was to decide whether the defendant did the acts of unlawfully inflicting injuries on the victims. The jury took about 30 minutes before unanimously ruling Veronique John unlawfully stabbed her children before stabbing her husband Nathan at a local car wash. Veronique John was charged with 2 counts of murder as well as attempted murder of her husband, but was ruled unfit to enter a plea due to mental illness. In a trial of the facts, a jury concluded that the 50-year-old had inflicted the fatal injuries. A trial of the facts involves the prosecution setting out the case in front, but the defendant does not have to appear in the proceedings. The jury decides whether the defendant committed the offense. Instead, they were asked to decide whether Veronique John did the acts alleged against her. The trial of the facts finally concluded on July 1, 2024, with Veronique John subject to an indefinite hospital order. Nathan, who survived the stabbing, gave a heart-wrenching victim impact statement in the court. He described how his world was turned upside down and how he had lost his 2 most important people in his life. He recounted the horror of the possibility of one child witnessing the other's death, adding another layer of tragedy. Detective Chief Inspector Cheryl Hannon from the Major Investigations Department said, "This case was distressing for all involved. It was traumatic for the local community and has left so many people devastated by what happened." Veronique John is being treated at Rampton High Security Hospital in Nottinghamshire and was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder as well as personality and depressive disorders. She still faces an indefinite hospital order following the jury's ruling. Mr. Justice Chowdhury said it was not possible to say how long the disposal order would last, but it was not time-limited. Both of the cases show how people who are so close to you can cause such huge damage to you. It takes not more than a few seconds for an angel to turn into a devil. And the next case is quite similar. This is Eritsim Sum Kit, a 44-year-old former bodyguard claimed to be Hong Kong's first overseas-trained bodyguard. However, this very same woman's actions turned a family meeting into a scene of horror and left the community reeling. Edith Sim had a cold personality. Even her neighbors maintained a distance from her. One of her neighbors on the 15th floor of Kin Ching House said she often bumped into her at the lift lobby, but would avoid her because she seemed to be neurotic. Tseng, a man in his 20s, described her as intense and grumpy. It was a sunny afternoon on June 26, 2018, in Hong Kong's Quarry Bay Park. The park, usually a serene place for relaxation, became the backdrop for an unimaginable crime. Edith Sim had invited her elderly relatives for what seemed like a peaceful gathering. She told them that it was to thank them for their care and support for her mother. Little did they know, Edith Sim had a sinister plan up her sleeves. The gathering was going well when suddenly Ada pulled out her gun and opened fire. She shot her 80-year-old aunt, Jim Su-fan, and her 62-year-old uncle, Chim Kun-ki, in the head at close range, killing them instantly. The horror didn't end here. She then turned her gun on her other relatives, shooting 72-year-old Jim Chin Kui in the arm and 60-year-old Jim Su-wai in the shoulder. Sim, however, showed no remorse. Panic ensued as the surviving relatives tried to escape and seek help. The injured Jim Chu-kwei was taken to the hospital and remained there in serious condition, while Jim Soo-wai was admitted and discharged. Sim was later found and apprehended by authorities near the City Plaza Mall, still carrying her weapons. The same night, the authorities decided to investigate Jim Chin-kui's house. Officers collected 2 model guns, an air gun, and some documents. When they investigated her, she was carrying a .25 caliber single-action semi-automatic pistol, 50 rounds of ammunition, and additional weapons including a box cutter and 2 knives. What could drive someone to commit such a heinous act against their own family? Investigations revealed a tangled web of familial tensions and unresolved grievances. Sim didn't have a good relationship with her relatives, particularly regarding the care of her mother and the inheritance of family property. After her mother was placed in an elderly care home in 2013, tensions escalated, culminating in her mother's death in 2015. It was revealed that a Nanfeng Sun Xuan flat worth more than $10 million was bought by Edith Sim's grandparents 40 years ago for about $20,000. When they died, that flat became vacant. The uncles and aunts wanted to sell it and share the profit amongst the 7 children of the grandparents. The 4th uncle who died was the will executor. Sim believed her relatives had wronged her mother by denying her a share of the family property, and she sought revenge. The officers in charge of the case also revealed that Edith Sim had changed her name from Nagi Chui Hua in 2000. She had an elder brother, and the two had already joined their hands for the plan. Jimmy Singh Baljinder from the International Bodyguard Association in Hong Kong stated that Ada had contacted the association to ask about the recruitment process of bodyguards, but didn't disclose the reasons. She later joined a course in the Philippines that involved shooting training and got certified. It seemed that they had planned everything very long ago. During the trial, Sim's defense painted a picture of a woman driven to the edge by depression and unfulfilled dreams. Her defense counsel argued that Sim was a loving daughter who frequently visited her mother and had been deeply affected by her passing. They claimed she acted out of despair and a sense of injustice. However, the court saw things differently. Superior Court Madam Justice Maggie Poon Man Kay described Sim as ungrateful and motivated by greed and resentment. Sim offered to plead guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter, but was rejected by Justice Maggie. The jury, composed of 7 women, found her guilty of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of shooting with intent. In 2021, even after being sentenced to life in prison, Sim appealed, arguing that the legal burden placed on her to prove diminished responsibility as a partial defense to murder was unfair and violated the presumption of innocence. The judge emphasized the gravity of Sim's actions and the need for a sentence that reflected the severity of the crime, so her application was ultimately dismissed by a panel of 3. The 5-judge panel ruled that the obligation for Sim to produce proof of lessened responsibility did not jeopardize her right to be deemed innocent under local law. Chief Justice Andrew Chung Quy-nung and Justice Joseph Folk ruled that proving a relevant aberration of mind is not an element of the murder crime itself. The burden placed on a defendant to establish the defense of diminished responsibility only arises when the prosecution has satisfied the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is otherwise guilty of murder, they said in their judgment. It further highlighted that the defendant is not presumed innocent at the time of arguing diminished responsibility, because they would have previously benefited from the presumption of innocence during the prosecution's case to prove the elements of murder. The court further determined that expecting the prosecution to prove the defendant is not suffering from mental illness would most likely offer considerable practical obstacles. Edith Sim was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment, plus an additional 18 years for the shooting with intent charges. However, she didn't stop there, and went on bribing an officer who was responsible for overseeing her ward, offering him $300,000 to avoid transfer to a women's security facility. And, as a result, on July 20th, 2023, The magistrate found her guilty of trying to bribe the officer in charge of watching over her ward, which only added to her charges. Edith Sim, to this day, is still serving her life sentence. All of these cases rule out one single question. Can we ever truly know someone? What are we supposed to do when someone we love suddenly becomes a stranger? Let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.